Hey, everybody, welcome to Experience Weekly Data Talk, a show where we talk with data science leaders from around the world. Today, we are talking with Dr. Kristen Sosulski. She's the professor at NYU Stern School of Business. She teaches data visualization, programming, and business analytics. She's also the director of the director of the Learning Science Lab at NYU Stern. She's also the author of 3 books, and today we're going to talk about her latest one, which is called Data Visualization Made Simple: Insights into Becoming Visual. Dr. Kristen Sosulski, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you so much, Mike.
So we always like to start these chats learning a little bit about our guests. Can you kind of share with us kind of your background, your academic journey that led you to the work you're doing today?
Absolutely. Again, really happy to be here. So my work really lies at the intersection of business analytics and learning science. And so my path wasn't like so direct getting there, but so I went to business school undergrad, and during that journey, I studied coding and information systems and also management, and ended up working at a startup at Columbia University called the Columbia Center for New Media Teaching and Learning. And we kind of called this back in the day, like MIT Media Lab for educational technology. And so that really inspired me to kind of bring together what I knew about technology and use it in service of teaching and learning. And at the time, I didn't really know what that meant. And so my journey while I was at Columbia, I was building really amazing technologies to help students learn in the classroom. So how to look at like a film, for instance, and deconstruct it using like a Java program and show frame by frame, you know, how a director kind of puts together a story. And through this, it was such an interesting journey, using technology and to provide tools for learners and Columbia students, that I ended up getting my doctorate in an area called educational technology. So I kind of brought together both like technology again and education and pedagogy. And so everything that I kind of do is I kind of treat as if communicating for learning. And in my book, Data Visualization Made Simple, it's all about how best to communicate the insights that you've spent a long time, mining your data and analyzing it to and making sense of it, to helping somebody else better understand that. So that's kind of like, in short, my journey. And along the way, being able to kind of come full circle and be a professor at NYU Stern, where I started, is kind of unique. So,
I mean, what you just said sounds so innovative, that you were like back in the day, like taking film and using JavaScript to help like deconstruct a film. That is so cool. I was a film major originally in college, and so I loved film. And I got to know more about this. So you would, was this a film class? Was this a computer science class?
Yeah, it was a film class. So like there is this scholar by the name of Stefan Scharf, and he came up with this way of actually stripping away the dramatic and narrative elements of film, so you can look at the structural elements and how frame by frame, as the camera moves closer to the subject or pulls away the subject, the suspense that it creates, but also that all the planning involved to create that suspense with the use of camera. I mean, it was just so we would look at something like from, say, Psycho, and we'd show the scene where like Marion stole her money in the back of the, it's sitting in the back of the car. For those of you that have seen the movie Psycho, and she's at a stoplight, and all of a sudden she sees her boss cross right in front of her. And so the camera zooms right in on her, and then it goes back to the picture of the boss, goes back in on her, and the suspense that creates is just amazing. But slowing it down to kind of see that alteration of the camera on the subject, and then what the subject sees, what the subject sees. And so we actually plotted that as a graph. Believe it or not, which was my first entree into data visualization. I could look at a film by looking at a line graph and understand what it meant. So that's all stuff.
That is so cool.
Yeah,
it's so cool. I mean, it shows like your innovative nature and like curiosity and creativity.
It was like really like a pleasure to be able to be involved in such a project. So yeah.
So was this while you were teaching, you were working on a PhD during this time?
Yeah, I was. So I was teaching like coding to teachers at Columbia University, and at the same
Wow.
time I was working at that lab that I mentioned, and going to school. So
Oh man, I cut out a little bit. Oh, okay.
okay.
Got you back. Um, so when did your love for data visualization start? Where was it like beginning for you?
I mean, that it was interesting that that project came up that I just talked about, the film project. I mean, that's really where I started seeing the power of that. Basically, the ability to analyze not just quantitative data, but that I can analyze film in this way, which kind of like spoke to my analytical nature, but and love for the arts at the same time. So that's really where it started. And one of the ways that we started testing to see if we gave students a chart of this film, literally a line chart that showed this alteration, let's just say, could they identify who the director was?
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that was like one of the questions on the exam. And we found that they could, because they started understanding what these different patterns were that directors use, like Hitchcock in particular, to create this drama and suspense in film.
Yeah, and what's cool about it is like you grow in more appreciation when you do that, because you're realizing that this director, it wasn't just shot willy-nilly, everything was planned.
Yes.
Like the camera is telling a story. And that's not always done today. Like not every director is like that. There are these people like a Hitchcock, right? Who planned out every scene, everything was storyboarded. There was a purpose behind the camera movement. I mean, that can't be said for every film today.
Right.
But it's so cool that you had kind of used data science and visualization to actually plot this out and then help students to see this and like appreciate for the film. And then it's really cool that you use data to almost like how, by looking at the data from how the film was made and shot, who the director was.
Yeah. And that really, from there on in, I started incorporating visualizations into my other like educational technology projects, and finding ways to really emphasize that how you best can communicate what you're finding in data. Like people don't want to look at a spreadsheet of numbers. And now, I mean, obviously with this, everybody, big data is like the big talk. So it's really, really important. I mean, in my job, like all the things I do, I feel like I'm constantly selling. And I can't show like, a bunch of numbers and really persuade people. I really need to show them the data, but in a way that they can understand, because I know my data the best. No one else, doesn't know it as well as I do. Yeah. And that's true for everyone working with data. So,
and I feel like your newest book, like helping people with data visualizations, is so important nowadays. I mean, whether you work in data science or not, if you're working with Excel, you're doing any sort of reporting, and you need to show those numbers in a compelling way, you have to use data visualization. And I feel like, well, for me, I never got any sort of training in school around this. I mean, I wasn't in maths, I wasn't in sciences, so I never like practiced data visualization myself. And so it wasn't until I was in working where I had to start doing reporting with Excel, right, and using like the bar graphs and the charts that were available to me. And thankfully, Excel makes it easy. But I think at the same time, like I messed up. Like I didn't, and I still mess up. Like I'm not presenting data in the best way I can. So I'm kind of curious about early on when you were doing data visualizations. Were there any mistakes that you made early on that when you were trying to present something in a compelling, creative way to get your point across, to tell a good data story, but you messed up in some way, or you later went back and said, oh, I should have presented it in this way?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm still messing up, right? you know, one thing is that your data can be in the wrong format. So I was working on a project yesterday, and I was trying to put together, I was looking at a bunch of different companies and their closing stock price over time. And I imported my data, and I was trying to get the 5-day moving average. So I plot one line that would show stock price over time, let's say for 30 days. And then I was trying to get the moving average. And when I would do it by hand, I was getting the wrong number. I was using a program called Tableau, and I was like, is something wrong? Do I not know how to compute the 5-day moving average? This is like pretty simple stuff. And then I said, my data was actually organized in reverse chronological order. So the computation was wrong, and it was all about my data format. And this is just something that now I didn't spend that long struggling with this problem because I realized it right away. But like developing fluency in visualizing your data, you can spot these things a lot quicker. But if it was like the first time that you did it, you might be like, okay, 5-day moving average, Tableau said it. This is what it is. This is what it is. Okay, looks good, done. And your data is actually wrong. Okay. In the sense that it was imported and structured the wrong way. So that's one thing on the more complicated scale. But I mean, picking the wrong chart type. So if you're showing, let's say, categorical data, you're probably not going to use a line chart. So if I want to show you like all the different features of a car and compare cars to one another. So you're in the market for one, and you're comparing all the different features. None of those things have a time dimension to them. Okay, so miles per gallon, things like that. Those are all what we call more like categorical data, rather than time series. You can't use a line chart, for instance. So it's also like using like too many colors. So you want things to kind of like, match with whether your company's brand or, your design aesthetic. And you find that you're using like 7 or 8 different colors to create that bar graph. And you really should only use like, I say like the most underused color, I think, in charts and graphs is gray. Like everything should be gray. And then if you want something to stand out, you use a brighter color that's a contrasting color with gray. So you could use black, for instance, or you could use, a very, vivid color, like a bright blue or something like that. If you want one of the bars to stand out, and then you have to think about why. Another mistake, just like one more, if you want one, is having a chart that doesn't say anything. You built it, but like, so what? You're telling me that you have, 2 million viewers. Okay, well, that's a single number. Do I need a chart to show that? How does that put that number in context? Show me how the viewership has changed over time, let's say.
Are there any chart types that you think are really great to use but are just underused?
That's interesting. I really do love the radar chart for showing, attributes of, if you're thinking about different attributes of, say, tennis players, right? So if you're looking at like, strong servers versus strong returners, and I'm a big tennis player, so the analogy works kind of for me, but the example. So if you're like, if you want to compare different attributes of like, say, players to one another, and usually those attributes, have a quantitative but more descriptive type of feature, then a radar chart's really nice. It kind of shows everything in more like a circular view, and then you can see where overlaps are in terms of those that have similar attributes versus those that have different attributes.
That radar chart looks really complicated to me. I don't even know how to read it.
Yeah, I mean, they use them a lot for like sports. The best thing is like when you can see the overlap, and if you only have a few characteristics. Like I was working with someone who was creating these radar charts to show the differences in founders of companies. So this is a project all around startups. And it's kind of to help venture capitalists, like, use other attributes about founders of companies rather than just kind of like where they went to school and like personality and things like that. So you would see, say, 3 founders of the company and see what they have in common in terms of personality or leadership skills versus where they're different. You could see if they're an introvert or an extrovert. For instance, you could see their success in raising funds. And their role in terms of creativity and communication. So,
there's that quote about there's lies, damn lies, then there's statistics. And
yeah.
Certainly like we can lie very easily with data visualizations on the way that we're playing with the visual. And I'm curious about, do you know any stories or any examples of ways that data has been presented that is very misleading because the person who's trying to share that story is biased and trying to manipulate the visualization to make them, tell a certain slant on the story?
Yeah. We see this all the time. So a classic example by I won't name the news source, shows a line chart that represents like the unemployment rate under, President Obama. And it shows it as a line chart, but actually it will show like that unemployment, it will actually put a point of 8.8% at almost at the 9 line. So it's actually move the data point to make the unemployment rate look like it's actually higher than it is visually. And so there's it happens a lot. Another example is using a bar chart. And if you notice that the y-axis won't start at 0, and that will over-exaggerate the differences. I see this a lot when they present stats, like, on like sports. So I see a lot of this on television because the use of bar charts, like, if it's only like a 10% increase, it's not going to look like that much.
Yeah.
But when that's over-exaggerated. But sometimes it's over-exaggerated by like 700 to 800%.
Oh, geez.
So you want the change in the data to be equal to the change in the size of the graphic. And if it's not, that's called something that Edward Tufte coined back in the day, a lie factor. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that must make you like someone who is an expert in this space. You must cringe when you see that. And then also, I'm guessing for you, because you're trained in this and you do this, like whenever a graph comes up on TV, you just must be like, okay, let's take a look at this.
I'm always snapping photos of it. I'm like, this is great. This is a great example. But I am like, I'm a little sad about it. That and that's, it's one of these things that it's such an important tool that we have at our disposal, right? The ability to kind of communicate visually, and it's just done wrong a lot.
Yeah, I wish I was in the room as you're watching some of these news networks putting up graphs to hear your comments.
Right.
That is crazy about the example about unemployment rate under Obama, and then putting that line like right next to the one to totally misrepresent the data.
Yeah. I'll send it to you after.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now, a lot of people I've talked to in data science, they hate the pie chart, and I'm kind of curious in your take on the pie chart. Because it has been so abused.
Yeah, it's been so abused, and I can explain some reasons why, but I don't hate any chart type. It's kind of there's a place for a pie, and it's very simple to interpret when you only have a few slices, when the slices are really different from each other, because as humans, we judge length much better than we judge area. And that's one of the reasons why it's not as effective. And plus people use a different color for every slice. So if we were going to, show, all the states in the US, and we have 50 different slices in a pie to show population by state. It's nuts. But you'll see these charts, and they exist, and every pie will, slice will be a different color.
Yeah.
And then labeled on top of it, and then you have to look at a legend. So, couple slices, and if the slices are, pretty different from each other, then that's a good use of a pie chart. But here's a secret. Every pie chart can be turned into a bar chart. Try it. Next time you want to create a pie chart, you can create a bar chart.
It's so funny because and since I work in social media, I have a lot of social media analytic tools, and some of the default graphs are pie charts. And I have some of those types of charts that you just mentioned where there's literally like 40 slices and they're all different colors. And it's really hard to read because they're labeled. And then like you run out of colors. So like everything starts to look like really bizarre. After you reach like 30 colors, it's like you're reusing different colors, different shades of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, just like a tip on that, if you're like first, like 4 slices or less on a pie, and you can use white space instead of color, and then label directly on the slices. So make the pie big enough, label directly on the slices, and use white space to separate. And you can use one color and you pick gray. And if you want one of the slices to stand out, then you can just shade that particular slice.
So your new book that just came out called Data Visualization Made Simple. Can you kind of, for those who have not heard of the book, can you kind of talk to us about it? How is the book broken up? What are some of the sections you're covering?
Sure. So in the book, the subtitle is called like Insights into Becoming Visual. And my goal for readers is to build visualization into your practice, right? So becoming visual. Just because you know how to create it doesn't mean that now you know how to create some visualizations, doesn't mean that it's part of your practice. It means that you have some fluency in the tools, but how are you using in your practice? And that goes, it's everything from asking the right questions of your data all the way to using that visualization in a presentation, or let's say as a dashboard tool, so as an interactive display to help others maybe explore a particular phenomena, or like you said in your analytics dashboard that you're using for social media, like you're probably like see that data and asking questions of that, and maybe not always getting the answers that you want, and so you might have to query or filter. So we talk about creating that kind of usable experience for users that might be like investigating, like I would call it like, audience-driven displays versus presenter-driven like presentations. For instance, when you're kind of putting a chart or graphic in a PowerPoint, that's much different than when you're presenting something that the audience can kind of explore and interact with. So we talk about the format of visualization a lot in the book. So everything from web to paper to presentation grade, and how the book kind of leads you through this process is we start with some examples. We start with really developing an understanding what visualization is and how it can be used. And then we jump right into tools, because everybody always asks me about the tools. So I put that right in chapter 2 to say, like, look, there's not like a one size fits all. If you want to create a network diagram, you're probably not doing that in Excel. You can, and it's going to take you like a few hours because it's possible, but it's a little bit of a hack, right? So you picking the right tool for the right purpose. And this goes everything from, well, do you want to be able to share these graphics with anybody? Well, sharing an Excel doc is different than sharing, a dashboard that you might create in Tableau, right? So you want everybody to interact with it and not just have their own copy. So we talk about all the different attributes for selecting the right tools for visualization. And then we look at the range. I introduced about 30, and there's more, 30 different chart types. And we look at those chart types. Yeah, there's so many in terms of the type of data that you have. So it's all driven by that, the type of data that you have.
That's awesome. Was there a favorite chapter that you enjoyed writing?
Oh my gosh. I loved writing chapter 8 because I didn't have to write it. And the reason why is I reached out to, friends and colleagues and professionals in that incorporate visualization into their practice, and it's filled with a bunch of examples and case studies, walking the audience through these different approaches to how people have used visualization in their practice. So that chapter is my favorite. And the reason why I included the case studies in the book is because I wanted real examples. I have my examples, but my practice can be a lot different. You know my background, I'm a lot different than, a data scientist working in a particular company, right? So I wanted to make sure that it was, going to really resonate with the audience, and they can see these different perspectives. And, that's also like a way to kind of help people learn, is to see the application of visualization from one discipline or one area of business to another. Everything from education to, healthcare. So
that's right. Is there any, I know the book is tons of case studies. Are there any favorite case studies you want to share today?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's this, one of my favorite case studies speaks to a research project that was done by somebody by the name of Andrew Hamlet, and he was looking at social media data. And that social media data had to do with the presidential candidates of the 2016 and their activity on Twitter. And he created his own set of metrics. And he said, can I predict the outcome of the election by just using Twitter data? And so,
interesting.
Yes. and he did. But that is, pretty fascinating and interesting that he actually was able to do that by seeing the activity and the tension of that Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton was really receiving on social media. And so looked at everything from, mentions to retweets to actual just the tweets themselves.
So so what were some of the factors to help determine who he thought was going to win? Like, what were some of the Twitter data that was really helpful? Because it's like more than just reach.
More than just reach, yeah. And so he obviously he weighted. It was he did weighted averages. It was definitely reach, and then it was activity on that reach. So like I said, retweets. So the proportional number of retweets of something that Donald Trump will post versus like Hillary Clinton's campaign team. So that was a really, really big factor.
Wow, that is fascinating. Interesting that being able to use social media data to help make predictions around a big thing like the elections and the presidency. It's absolutely fascinating. So in your book, you have it filled with real life case studies that will be very useful for people that are wanting to build data visualization. What about those that are just starting out? They're new to data visualization, and they don't really know where to begin. They don't want to make a lot of the common mistakes. Is this a good book to be a go-to resource for them?
Yeah, I hope so. That's one of the reasons why I wrote it. I teach this course to undergrads, MBAs, executives, and with the assumption that there's no really prior knowledge required. So I have a whole section on working with data, getting your data in the right format. If you want time series or geospatial, if you want to plot the map. I'm just gonna reach over and get my wire for my. I'm running out of battery here, so perfect. And so yeah, I have a whole chapter on data, and in addition, a whole chapter on design. So what are those design principles? And I only have 10, and they're not mine. They're well-researched, well-studied principles that come from the likes of, Edward Tufte, Stephen Few, Donna Wong, and many, many others that really have influenced these 10 key things to keep in mind, starting with how do you select the right chart type to making sure that you're not lying with data.
Hmm. Now, can you talk a little bit about when presenting the data? So let's say that you've been through the steps of, you've formatted your data properly, you labeled it properly, you have thought about what sort of visualization would make most sense, you've made that visualization, and now you're actually in the workforce, you're having to now present that data to somebody else in a meeting, and you need to tell that data story. Do you have any advice for those they've worked so hard, right? This is their data, they're very proud of it, they can't wait to show it, they've done a great data visualization, but now they need to tell that story to somebody who is not familiar with the data. They don't even know all the work you've done. Do you have any advice for how to craft that narrative?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. First off, and this is like a little trick, something I call it the party favor. So, when you go to a wedding or, a party or something, well, mostly wedding, like you get like a favor at the end, right? And so something to remember that moment. So make sure your audience remembers your key takeaway and that you have one. If you don't have one, you're not really thinking about them. You're thinking about yourself and what you're presenting, but you're not really thinking about what they're getting out of it. And that's like one of the most important things. So at the end, if you gave your audience a quiz, they should all be able to do really well on it, because the way that you've explained whatever it is, your insight, your results, should come across crystal clear. And it's okay to remind the audience about what the takeaway is. Just because you show something and it shows a trend going up doesn't mean that everybody sees exactly what you see. So take the time to explain. So if you're showing a line chart, maybe walk through the various points in time on that line chart. And you could do it slowly, slide by slide, do a progressive reveal, and really annotate your displays using your voice by providing explanations. Don't try to put it all on the chart and expect everybody's going to see it. And I call that little trick is like, don't be a dolphin in a rose. And what I mean by that is there's famous, like graphic that has, it's one of those like optical illusion type things, right? Where you see a beautiful picture of a rose. And I ask my class, what do you see? And everybody's like, oh, it looks like a decent looking rose. It's red. And if you look really closely, there's a shape of a dolphin planted in that rose. But of course you don't see it because you're not looking for it. So you're never looking for the dolphin in the rose. So we don't expect to see that. And so again, don't put something in your visualization that, someone wouldn't already, kind of see right off the bat. That really has to be like super explained or something like that. Make it really clear. Don't be the dolphin in the rose. Those are a few tips. I can go on, but those are a few.
Yeah, those are really good. I like the way that you put that. And I'm also curious about, because you said like having one, and I think that's smart, having one key takeaway that, because you're being thoughtful of them, not yourself, you want to make sure that this, whatever it is, whatever the data is telling, you want to make sure that that's understood by your audience. Do you feel that sometimes we present too much? Like when we're going in to present data, that there is sometimes we make the mistake of giving out too much information where the key message, the key theme is now lost and the audience walks away like, okay, well, there's a lot there. I'm not sure exactly what to do with that.
Yeah, right. So what you're presenting there is like, hey, I did a lot of work or I have a lot of data, but you're not really communicating what it is that you did work on or found. And that's really important. There's so many times when I see presentations where people don't even speak to the charts that they have on the screen. They kind of have like their bullet point list and there's like a little chart and kind of they're just going through what it is that they want to say, but they're not showing how that chart supports the words that they're saying. So if you're going to show it, make sure that it's supportive of you, the presenter, not just supportive or decorative in your presentation.
I'm curious now about, because you teach data visualization at NYU, and no doubt you've seen lots of students present data to you. I'm kind of curious about Have there been any like standout student presentations that you were like, they nailed it, they did such a great job? And any takeaways that you can share with our audience?
Oh my gosh. I mean, absolutely. Absolutely. I've worked with, like hundreds of students, and, at the end of my course, what I do is every student in my class gets 2 minutes and they have to tell me a data story.
In 2 minutes.
I time it with my phone, and
you're brutal.
And they're on stage. And everybody also provides feedback, written feedback. I have a little like rubric criteria. And it's very rare at that point that a student goes over and that there isn't a clear takeaway. So I mean, like, I would like to brag about all my students because they do a fantastic job by the end of the class, for sure. There's been so many really, really interesting projects. One in particular is, this group, it was actually a group of students who worked on identifying the next area that real estate investors should invest in, based on gentrification and signals of neighborhoods getting more investment from businesses. And so what they did is they actually mined data from, say, Yelp, for example, in addition to data from your classic real estate sources, and Zillow and the likes, to kind of come up with their own metrics based on some social media data, in addition to your traditional real estate data, like comparables and those types of things, or recently sold like properties, et cetera, to show signals of gentrification of these areas as like, oh, okay, is it going to be in New York? It's like, oh, it's going to be the next Williamsburg, right? Is always kind of the question. So, and they were able to visualize that on a map. So if you're looking for properties, you can kind of see those signals of the gentrification happening. And again, it was used for business purposes. So that was a big one. That was a big one.
So I'm curious about why 2 minutes. That sounds so hard to do, to take all this data, your presentation, and condense it down into a 2 minute little narrative. Why is it important that you make them do it in 2 minutes?
Because if I give them 15, they'll take up all 15. If I give them an hour, they'll take up the whole hour, and it will still be the same message. I don't think the message should change all that much. Because I used to experiment and do longer ones. And it's really hard to do it in 2 minutes. So the whole idea is less is more, and they can use as many slides as they want. If they want to use 100 slides, they can. And maybe the slide is just taking me through each point in the graph and they're doing it quickly. If they want to use, I encourage a lot the use of animation in visualizations, again, to do that walkthrough, that progressive disclosure. So they can embed like a video animation of that, and it really helps them just like stay focused on what that insight is. And we start by storyboarding, and I say like, all right, create your slides and actually write the insight on the top of your chart. If you can't do that, then you're going to cut that. So we do we do a check-in like halfway through the semester, and then kind of just so it's something they build upon throughout the whole semester.
And how are the other students grading them? Because you mentioned that everyone's kind of grading the people that are presenting. What are some of the markers that they're grading on? Okay. So like one, does it violate any of the design principles? So I mentioned that I have 10 of them. So did they appropriate chart type? Did they attribute their data sources? So lots of times we see charts and we're like, who created it and where the data come from? Why should I? Right.
So that's a big one. So again, the design principles, we also look at, are they showing the right level of detail for their insight? So if they're talking about neighborhoods and they're showing me, a map of zip codes, neighborhoods are smaller than zip codes. So they're not showing the right level of grain, we call it, with the data. And that's really important. Maybe they can't get it. Okay, well, that story or narrative has to change. So that's another thing. Are they able to connect with their audience? And that's like, there's a lot of strategies to do that, that we all know, but one in particular is like, are they building on the audience's prior knowledge? Instead of just like showing you something new and like you have nothing to grab onto as the audience, because like people, my students, will talk about anything from gentrification to, to fitness. And so not everybody has a background in all of these areas. And so what can you say? What kind of question can you raise that might be provocative and really like hook your audience in the beginning, or build on something they already know? Give them a scenario that would they be familiar with. And that's another thing that they're judged on. Eye contact with the audience. Do they allow for questions or participation? And you have 2 minutes. So how are you going to fit that in? Well, you can ask a question, or a raise of hands, but ways to kind of like that you're not creating this divide, right? And so now you're establishing trust, credibility, as you are presenting your narrative to the class. So those are just a few things. And then there's some technical details like, is a chart readable at all? Oh my goodness, like if I'm sitting in the back of the room, can I read that font? We've all been in that situation. So chart design and also slide design is something that we look at. And is the story like interesting? Did it capture my attention as well? Did it need to be told? So, and some of these, of course, are subjective, which I'm sure you're thinking, but they're important questions still to ask.
Well, it sounds like you have a bunch of awesome and lucky students because they're getting so much out of this course that you're teaching, not only the principles, but like learning to be a good critic. So next time they're looking at data, they're just going to be much smarter on how they're reading it, how they're interpreting it. And so not only coming out away from your course, but being a great or being better at data visualization, but just walking away being a better critical thinker.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm so lucky to have my students too, because they teach me all the time, better ways to kind of explain and to kind of offer guidance on this critique process. So when I started teaching this class, students would be like, well, why do I need this? I want to be like a manager, or, like I'm going to be like leading companies. I'm not going to be creating my own charts and graphs. And I really had to build a business case through my own practice. So I thank my students for that. And that's why I included the case studies in the book, but build a business case for data visualization and why it's important. And I know like all the data scientists online, they probably get it right away because you're working with data. It's the obvious. Not everybody is at that level of being a data scientist. And so finding other ways or a financial analyst or any of these positions. And so finding a way to communicate that is so important. And so that's one thing that we talk about in the course. And the other is that, like, how are you going to lead if you can't help others and help critique the visualizations that they're creating for you, right? So that's another way to look at it.
Okay, so for those listening to the podcast, make sure to do a search for Data Visualization Made Simple. Kristen, where can people find this book?
Oh, you can find it on Amazon, or you can go directly to the publisher, which is Routledge.
Okay, wonderful. I'll make sure to put a link on the Experian blog so people can go and learn more about the book over at your website. Kristen Sosulski is spelled KristenSosulski.com. And you can get links going directly from there to Kristen's new book on data visualizations. For those that have questions, want to contact you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you, Kristen?
Twitter is great. Just my last name, Sosulski, Sosulski. It's my handle at Twitter. And if you want to email me, that's cool too. I'm ks123@nyu.edu.
Oh, I love that email address. That's great. 123. That's cool. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for being our guest in Data Talk. It's awesome having you, and wishing you all the best in your new book. I can't wait to read it, and hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much, Mike.